YouTube fam- Hi, YouTube family. Welcome back. And if you're new here, I'm Lori. And here we talk about all the things, a lot on religion and a whole bunch of other subjects. And today I am so lucky to announce that I have my first guest. And I'm so excited. Everybody meet Julie Clough. She's a coach, and speaker, and author, and just beautiful, as you can see.
Well, thank you. So fun to be here with you, Lori.
Welcome, welcome. And Julie, I want to also just start by, what this YouTube today and this interview is all about. I'm sure you caught one of my YouTubes and thought, oh, I can relate to this. Let me email her. She wants to talk to someone. So I'll preface this by saying you were LDS. You left the church in 2024, but then let's go backwards.
Yes.
And let me ask you the burning question. Did you grow up in Utah or Idaho?
I didn't. No, I grew up in Florida. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
didn't.
that's part of the story for sure.
Well, tell me what were you born into the church? Were you a convert?
Yeah, so I was born into the church, but in a part member family, which is often what we call it when, one parent is a member and the other parent isn't. And so my dad had grown up in a basically religionless home. And so he didn't really come from any religious background. If you pressed him on it, he would say, I think his grandparents were Baptist or something, but yeah, there was no religion in his background. And then he married my mom, who was raised LDS. And her grandparents had actually was probably one of the first one of the first families to join the church in Florida, in the 1920s.
Wow.
And so, yeah, she grew up in the church. Her mother grew up in the church, and she grew up in the church. And she had a similar growing up experience in that her dad wasn't a member. And then he actually joined the church as she was leaving for college. And so, she grew up in a, family of eight, but that wasn't because they were Mormon. That was because they were just a family of eight, um, in this kind of post World War II world, and that
Right.
was not, completely uncommon to have a large family. So, yeah, so she grew up in this family, and this is really part of my story because growing up in this household where there was this diversity was interesting and challenging because um, there was a lot of conflict because there wasn't agreement
Mhm.
on religion, but also I looked at my mom's family and they they were good people and trying to live good lives. And then I looked at my dad's family that was so disjointed and really dysfunctional in so many ways. Just came from really, really hard circumstances.
Mhm.
And so in my young brain, I went, I want this, right? So my whole goal was to find somebody that I could marry that would have that mutual, religious background, have that mutual religious desire
Right.
to live the gospel, to be a part of it, and that's exactly what I did. I started dating my first husband when I was 16 because 16, that's the magic number.
Had to laugh because that's true.
It's so true. So we started dating, and then he went on a mission. We went out to BYU together. He went on a mission. He came home. We got married a few months later. That's the short story of that. And and I thought, okay, now I get to live my happily ever after, and it didn't turn out that way. He graduated from BYU, and we moved back to Florida.
Hmm.
And I will say, he he had a he had a motorcycle accident and a pretty severe head injury while we were in college and while I was expecting our first child.
Oh,
And I really think this contributed to some of the things that happened afterwards, but he started to unravel over the next few years. And by year 9 of our marriage, it ended because he was involved in all kinds of things that were unsavory and was having an affair and on and on and on and on. Well,
oh,
the interesting part about this story is that and here I was, I thought I had this happily ever after. I served as a young women's president when I was 25. I was a seminary teacher at 26. Like I was like all in leadership from the very beginning. Um, and even had callings growing up as a teenager. I taught primary. I was the back in the day, so back in the day when they had junior Sunday school, which was kind of like primary on Sunday while the adults were in Sunday school, I was the music leader. So I played the piano for junior Sunday school for 2 years, and then I was the music leader for 2 years. So, like, I was like all in. Like, you can't be any more all in.
no, you can't. You were all up in it.
I was all up in it, exactly. And so then to have this like crazy experience where my husband is just going off the rails and then seeking out some, support for what was happening. And I actually ended up going to we went as marriage counseling actually in an effort to get him some help. We went to marriage counseling, and this counselor was not LDS, but he was a preferred provider,
Yeah.
if you will, like somebody that they had kind of vetted. And so we started going to this therapist, and it was really interesting because and there's so much to this part of the story which I won't go into, but the bottom line is this therapist one day my husband didn't show up for the appointment. Like I showed up and he didn't.
Hmm.
And this therapist basically had this heart to heart with me and said, "You can't patch air." And he said, he is going down the drain. He is spiraling down, and basically said, you know, in in so many words, get out. And then I started hearing this from other people too. And I had even some leaders in our ward that came to me and said, "Hey, you need to get out. Like you need to get out." I mean,
Wow.
it was pretty pronounced situation. And then there was a change in bishops. And the new bishop had been our like really, really good friend. And I love this man. Like we're still friends. So
Hmm.
I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but it's just
Right.
the dynamics of a temple wedding. It's the dynamics of a temple marriage and the thought process behind that. And so this new bishop, like his goal was to get us back together. At this point, we had separated, so he came over and said, "Hey, you're separated and you're wanting a divorce because you're working with all these single people." Now, mind you, I had 3 little kids,
Okay.
a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. Actually, they were 5, 3, and it was actually, I guess it was the weekend that my son turned 1 that we separated. So yeah, so they were 6,
Oh,
4, and 1. So
so
they were
Ju-
tiny.
so Julie, here you were having these kids close together and pregnancies, and he's off the rails and doing all kinds of things.
Oh yeah, there's so much to this story that yeah, you wouldn't even believe if I told you. I often tell people, and people don't really know what this means anymore, but I often say I lived the Friday night movie of the week. Nobody knows what that means anymore, but I
I
know
do.
what that means.
I know what it means too.
It was
Whoa.
that drama that came on, that television movie drama that came on Friday nights. And so, yeah, that's what it was like. But yeah, so it just confused me. And I remember after he left, telling me that I needed to patch things up, and that again, like all the responsibility was on me to make it right, and that didn't make any sense to me. And so and my husband had been disfellowshipped and then excommunicated, and I mean, uh, this leader was not unfamiliar with the circumstances, let's
Right.
just say, as a friend and as a leader. And so he left, but that night I was kind of in this confusion, like, am I doing the right thing? It's so hard to break up a marriage when you've got three kids and you've got this temple marriage, which is just like this extra layer of, this is what God wants, God wants you to stay. And but God told me very clearly, my gut, God, instincts, whatever you want to call it, spirit, was I very firmly knew that the marriage was over. And so I did leave. But I want to back up for just a second,
Please do.
because when we got married in the Salt Lake City temple, because we were both live from Florida, but we were going to school
Oh.
in Utah, at BYU.
Mm-hmm.
And we got married in the Salt Lake temple. And because my dad wasn't a member
Mm-hmm.
and my siblings were younger than me and had not been endowed, and at that time, and people don't believe this, but it's true, at that time, women could not be endowed unless their husbands were members. And so she was not my mom, even though she was a faithful member, um, primary president, Relief Society leader, all of the things. She could not be endowed because,
Really?
yeah, because my dad was not a member. That changed.
Of course.
Um,
Of course it did.
so I got married in 83, and I want to say it was early 90s when
Mm-hmm.
it changed, and she did go through the temple.
So new revelation.
Yeah, exactly. So I went all on my own, and
Wow.
my family was outside. And you're in this space, like, you're getting married, you're excited, and we'd been together for 5 years, other than him being on a mission, and for a couple of years of that, but we'd been together for 6 years really at that point. And I was just happy to be getting married, and so oblivious to the fact that I was going into the temple and leaving my family outside and getting married and coming out and going, I'm married. I mean, like, if that's not religious harm, I don't know what is, you
And
know?
isolation
Yeah.
on your wedding day. And to
And
be
my family. I mean, for
Mhm.
me, it's like more about my family
Yeah.
and how they must have felt. And, and my dad lived under this shadow of being less than, because he wasn't a member, he smoked, he was, and he had his own set of problems coming from the background that he did, and was definitely, uh, definitely a victim of neglect as a child, and that came forward in the way that he parented and the way that he lived his life
Hmm.
um, as an adult. But yeah, so I just look back on that now, and my heart aches for this, this religion that says families are forever, but also there's a big comma after it. Families are together, comma, if. And there's a lot of ifs in there. And, and I grew up feeling like my family wasn't forever because my parents hadn't been to the
Hmm.
temple. Um, and I grew up feeling like I was less than, or didn't, nothing. I couldn't measure up because of that, but also I had so much hope in the church. I had so much hope, and I had so much I was just a responsible kid. I was the oldest, so like the church system made sense to me, the rules and the do this and the do that. And I was like, okay, I'm doing all the things. But yeah. And then when my marriage ended, I remember my former, this is the craziest thing. I look back, I mean, I thought it was crazy at the time too, honestly, but even more so now. But after my divorce, I remember my former mother-in-law saying to me one day, "It occurs to me you're no better off than your mother is." Because now I'm not in in a celestial marriage. And our ceiling hadn't been canceled or anything. But I yeah, it's there was just so much of this like religious overlay to everything in life. Like even when I walked into the courtroom for to finalize the divorce, my husband at the time, what I was surprised that he was even there, honestly, but he showed up, and as I walked by him, he said, God doesn't want this. And I was like, what do you know about God? But it was just a way of manipulating.
Yeah, because he never showed that he wanted it or
Yeah.
that
So
he thought God wanted it, right?
yeah, he wasn't living any of the standards at that point. I was the one that was legitimizing his life because he could show up and say, "See, I'm a family man." And he could show up at church and then the next day go and do his crazy stuff that he was involved in. And so, yeah, it was a lot of mind crap. It
You
was
must have been exhausted, Julie, with the kids and with that going on and the church callings and this. I mean, yeah.
it was a lot. It was a lot. And then, so interestingly, 2 weeks after our divorce was final, I went on my first date with my current husband, and we've been married now for 32 years. So,
Wow.
so we married, and because of all the crazy requirements, and men can be married twice in the temple, or more, and women can't, and all that stuff. I had to go through this whole ceiling cancellation. We actually got married in my parents' house because somebody said it's going to take forever to get a ceiling cancellation. So just get married and then you can do the ceiling when that comes through, which was really, really good advice for us and our circumstances. And it also allowed my whole family to participate. And I had a wedding with
Yeah.
all my closest friends and all my family, and there were no restrictions, and everybody showed up, and we had the wedding, and we had the party, and it was wonderful, and it took uh yeah, and then the whole ceiling cancellation.
For
So
those for those that might be watching, um, that aren't Mormon and are maybe new to hearing about the religion, can you explain what a sealing in the temple means? If a marriage or, like a sealing, and you're talking about, trying to be unsealed
yeah,
and
yeah.
what a sealing is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, traditionally, people will get married, and we're familiar with the language "till death do you part." And in the LDS church, they believe that, you go to the temple and you have this other marriage ceremony, this different marriage ceremony that's for time and all eternity. And so things have changed over the years, and more recently in the last like maybe 5 years, they are actually allowing people to get married civilly and then be sealed in the temple. Because I went to a wedding like that.
Really?
Um, four
Wow.
years ago, I guess it was 3 years ago, I went to a wedding like that. And so
Huh.
that is kind of the new stance. But so So the sealing can be done at the time of marriage, and you get your marriage license and the whole thing and the certificate of marriage, which is what I did with my first wedding. But my second one, so how this works is that men are allowed to be sealed to as many wives as they want to. So if I had just, married my second husband in the house and didn't want to be sealed to him for eternity, then I could have just married him, and my first husband, I would have still been sealed to my first husband. It's also crazy talk. It's crazy talk now, but like trying to even explain it, I'm like, oh my gosh. But women can't. And so, in order to be sealed, in order to have that special blessing of being told that, we're married for all eternity, I need to go through a process of requesting that my first sealing be canceled. And so, to do that, I had to write a letter and explain why I wanted to have that done, which honestly, does it make any sense? He'd been excommunicated. It seems pretty cut and dry,
Totally.
doesn't it?
Hmm.
But for whatever reason, I had to go through the whole rigmarole and send in this letter, and then that went to the bishop, and then that went to the stake president, and from there it was supposed to go to headquarters for the final, check off to have that done. But they kept holding on to my paperwork because they were waiting for my ex-husband to respond. He had left the country. He was often who knows where. He was never going to respond. He wasn't interested in responding. And I ended up having to put a lot of pressure on them um, to just send the paperwork in. Interesting, Lori. You're gonna die when you hear this. I recently saw somebody had posted the application they have now for a temple sealing, and it's an application. Like you have to fill out this form, and one of the questions on there is list your previous sins, even if they've been repented for.
What?
I was flabbergasted.
I am too. I
I
never
was
knew that.
absolutely flabbergasted. What does that have to do with the price of rice in China? Like I don't know what that's got to do with anything.
I
But
mean,
yeah, they
to
they were
just,
requesting that. And like, a person who has gone through a repentance process is now having to write down their sins. I have a friend who more recently, probably in the last 5 years, I don't remember exactly the timing on this, was trying to get a cancellation on her sealing from her first husband. He had since died, and so they were requesting a letter from, I think it was either his father or her father instead of the ex-husband, and her oldest son, which isn't even her oldest child. Like this kind of, I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. It's crazy, the control mechanism of the hierarchy, of the patriarchy, and all of that. And sadly, even with all of this going on, like I was super frustrated, and I was calling, and I was, telling him, look, you got to put this stuff through. We want to have this done. But even with all of this, I stayed completely engaged and completely committed to the
wow.
church.
Wow.
And my, second husband and I, we had three more children.
Hmm.
And and then at one point, we found out that two of our children had been abused by another child in a member's home. And when this came out into the ward, then the mom in this home was called to be the Cub Scout leader. And I told them I was not taking my son over to their house. The, and I wasn't taking one of my children over to the house where this abuse had happened. And I was called in to forgive and all of that. And I was like, this is not about forgiveness. This is about safety. This is about mental health. This is about taking care of our children. What kind of a mother would I be if I'm taking my child over there? Then this family was asked to speak in church, including the person, the kid who had done the abuse. And then they're speaking in church. And it's like all this kind of schmoozing was happening for this family, which I have so much, love for them, and it, really painful, awful situation that I wouldn't have wanted to be the mother of that situation. And so, um I have a lot of empathy for their plight in all of this, but the leaders were just not, and these are smart people. These are smart people. These, and in all these situations, and this was in a totally different area.
Yeah.
We've moved a lot, and these are smart people. And attorneys and um, you know, what am I trying to say? But like people who are smart, they're doing smart work in the world, right? And then they're called into these positions, and then it's almost like our brain goes out the door, and we're just like doing what we're told to do within this structure that can be so unhealthy.
Well, I think it's almost like, in my opinion, that you're right. And that's not uncommon for church leaders to be attorneys and doctors and, so on and so forth, making great salaries, very educated and great at their jobs. But the minute they step out of that building or that office, they're so dumbed down
Yeah,
by everything they believe in. Their rationality just goes out the door. They're in a
yeah,
fantasy world, in my opinion, in their thinking.
yeah, yeah. And they're put in terrible situations. These, especially these men who are called to be bishops, and they're just put in just horrific situations. I think about the bishops in my life that were trying to advise me as I was going through a divorce, or trying to advise me as I was dealing with abuse of my children, or trying to advise me as I was, after my brother had died by suicide, like all these things that happened. And here, these are the people that I'm thinking to go to.
Oh,
And I just, my heart goes out to them. And I just want to say, if you're asked to be a bishop, don't do it, because you're really putting yourself in such a precarious situation where you're giving out, you're looked at as an authority for people, and there's so much potential for harm in that situation. So much potential for harm, and so much potential for even risk to the person in that leadership position. You think about, like, we look at the risk that children are in when they're in a closed room with a
mhm.
bishop talking about sexuality, but then there's also risk to the bishop, if he's accused of something that maybe didn't wasn't said or wasn't done, right? Like there's just a lot of risk in that situation that I can see it so clearly now, but couldn't see it then. Yeah.
Well, it kind of seems like the bishops, um, maybe some of them know, but I would say a lot don't, that they're being trusted and put in a position to not only just download a lot of, grief, sorrow, um, people's trauma, financial situations, marital problems, but also playing judge and jury,
Yep.
having to be this person to listen and then make decisions in behalf of, you know, what God thinks should happen now
Yeah.
and needs to pray about it, in terms of someone confessing something that in the church's eyes they may deem, breaking the word of wisdom or the 10 commandments, whatever. And so
Right.
that's a lot to
It's an
hear.
awful lot. It's an
Mhm.
awful lot, and it's so challenging having these conversations because I still have so many people in the church who are family and friends who I love dearly. And I don't do this lightly because I don't want to hurt them, but at the same time the church created me. I taught seminary. I did missionary work. I there were a lot of people who were baptized because of my influence. A lot of people. And then there's and then I was a public affairs director in my stake in Kentucky, where and putting on these like being involved with community events and trying to put this good face on the church and always trying to, and I didn't realize until I left how much I was representing. I was a representative of the church. I wasn't myself. I didn't even know, I didn't even recognize how much that was influencing the way that I interacted with people every single day. And until that burden of responsibility of always putting a good face on the church was lifted. And so it's really challenging. But in 2007 on Mother's Day, this is a really painful part of my story. But in 2007 on Mother's Day, my two youngest children died in a car accident, and I was the driver of the car. And it was a rollover accident, and they were thrown from the car and they died that day. Like there was and my 12-year-old son was also with me, but Carrie, 10, who was 10 at the time, and David, who was 8, they died that day. And that was just horrific. And I we were traveling. We lived in Texas at the time, and when this accident happened, we were at the border in Mississippi and Alabama, and this local bishop, came to the hospital because they're trying to find somebody that could come and be there. And he sat with me, and I again, like I have so much appreciation. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for that bishop to sit with a mom who just lost two children, but he sat there with me talking about the plan of salvation. And I just wanted to say, do you not think I already know that? Like that's not that does not cure everything. That does not, like, yes, will we see them in the afterlife? Sure, but right now this is painful, right? This is painful. And so my my go-to when they died, like, it was horrific. It was horrific. I had PTSD. I was deep depression, all the stuff, like all the stuff that you could imagine. I dealt with for 3 years. Like it was just this hellhole that I was in um for 3 years. And during that time, I had some really unique spiritual experiences that connected me with that this was, and this is really hard to explain and this may not make sense to a lot of people, but I really came to understand that this was the plan. But see, in my head, everything that happened was within the space, within the box of what Mormonism had taught me. And so I went all in. I was a seminary teacher. I know the scriptures. I learned to delve into the scriptures and find answers and all of that. I was a scriptorian, if you will, Um and and I so the gospel, the church was really meaningful to me during that time and really helped me. So when I say I didn't leave lightly, I didn't leave lightly. Like I had a lot to lose. If all this is true, if Mormonism is true, and I leave, I'm I'm essentially in the eyes of those who are still, believing members, I essentially am letting go of that eternal association with my children and my brother who have died. And everybody essentially, right? So it makes no sense for me to step away unless I feel strongly that that was the correct thing to do.
Well, I want to react for a minute here. I mean, just so everybody watching knows, I did not know about your two
Oh,
youngest children. So if you saw my face just kind of lose the color, that's the one thing that I think is the ultimate worst thing that could happen to anyone who's a parent is to lose a child, never
yes.
mind to lose two. So I am so deeply sorry from the bottom of my soul, I'll
Thank
say,
I
and
know.
also about your brother as well. And I'm just listening to you and I'm blown away because I'm looking at your beautiful face and your smile, and I'm hearing you tell me these things. And after each thing, I'm hearing you say, but I really love these people and I care about these people. And you look at the bright side of each one of these people and you have empathy and sympathy and understanding of their position and why that bishop was in the hospital with you and why he was saying what he was saying, because you were
I would have done
literally,
the same thing.
yes, you literally would have expected to hear that. But at that moment, I'm sure that a light went on that, yeah, okay, I know that. But this just happened, and you know, you're probably thinking, am I going to survive the next moment? So
Yeah,
I just
exactly.
wanted to inject there for a minute and just say, I know anybody watching this is going to notice that about you as well. And I admire that. And I will tell you right now, you are an angel, because I'll
Oh,
tell you what, I would have been swearing up and down like a sailor at people with all the things you like. This is what makes you know when you think you have it bad, don't trade it for somebody else's problems or issues that or their lives, or you'll find out you maybe couldn't survive that.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and and it's not it's part of my story, and it was super super painful, and I will, the the LDS aspect of it was both helpful and hurtful. It was helpful in that I clung to what I had learned about, the plan of salvation and being with them again and so on and so forth. But also, I was driving on a Sunday, and so I was beating up myself thinking this accident happened because I was traveling on a Sunday. It's nonsensical. But
Right.
that's where your brain goes because you're like, I'm being punished. I literally said that to somebody 3 years after the accident. I said, I am being punished.
Mm.
I literally said that to somebody. It was so painful. It was so awful. It was so horrendous. And then also my brain would go in, did I teach my kids enough? Were they good enough? Were they blah 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 blah. I mean, it's of course they were good enough. Of course they were okay. Of course this accident had nothing to do with the fact that I was driving on a Sunday.
No, it
I
didn't.
see all that now. But at the time, that was really hurtful and harmful. And to sit in that space of feeling like somehow I had caused this because I was not doing something right. And keep in mind, I'm like in all the leadership callings. I'm like I said yes to everything. I was doing all the things. And yet I questioned if it was good enough and if I was being um, punished. And that's what it felt like, you know. And when my brother had died, which was like 15 years before, 18 years before my kids passed away, um, he he died by suicide. And at the time that he passed away, the teaching in the church was this is a sin, you know, it's like they're basically he had given up his eternity, right? Which again, they softened over the years. And I came to, you know, soften my views around that. Obviously, he's yeah, I do have a belief in an afterlife. I do believe that he's okay. I do believe my children are okay. I don't think that this is, you know, my beliefs have changed so much, and they were changing while I was still in the church, and I was able to still make it all fit because I would find evidence that there were leaders who would teach certain things. And so, because you can always, because they're always saying different things. So you can always find a leader that will that will collaborate with your own thoughts and feelings. Um, yeah, so it was really, really painful. But at the 3 year mark, you know, 3 years after my children died, I was in just a horrific space. Like the darkness was tangible. Like I could feel it like within me. It was just everything was just so, so dark. And I'd been in therapy for 2.5 years, and I'd done EMDR and all of this, um and it had helped, and it had helped my PTSD. I was able to drive again, you know, things like that. But darkness, just pain, depression, all of it. And my bishop asked if he could give me a blessing. And so I remember sitting in the chapel. I couldn't even focus on what was happening, you know, on the stand or any of that. And then after the meeting, I remember just kind of dragging myself, like this shell of myself, from that bench to the bishop's office. And my husband and I, or my husband and the bishop, gave me a blessing. And within 24 hours, that darkness had lifted. I was serving as the young women's president. I didn't even tell you that part. At 2.5 years, they asked me to be the young women's president. And I remember feeling like I was going to faint when they did that. And those girls, who were the youngest girls in that group, were my daughter's friends. And when they announced it from the stand that I was the new leader of these girls, you know, 12 to 18, one of my daughter's friends leaned over to her mom and said, "Isn't that too hard?" A 13-year-old understood that.
Yes, she recognized that.
And it was the thing that spiraled me out of control, was being in that position. I like held it together for a month or two, but then I just spiraled out of control. And I kept telling the bishop, "You need to release me, you need to release me." And he was like, I feel like I need to keep you in there. You can just you can ask other people to pick up the slack. But ultimately, he gave me this blessing, and I did receive a miraculous healing. And these things do happen because there is a, I just believe, my personal believing is God wants to bless us wherever we're at. This is not, you know, in religion in general, and Mormonism, like we have this idea that God is hard to connect to. Like we've got to do all this stuff, we've got to earn our spot, we've got to like do all this work to get God to pay attention to us, to be able to, you know, to be lined up so we can feel God's influence. And I was feeling God's influence while I was in the dumps. Like I walked into a Walgreens 5 months after my kids died. I walked in and I saw a costume, and my brain was still not, like it took, months and years for me to accept what had happened to any level, right? I saw this costume and I thought, oh, Carrie would love this, my daughter. She would love that flowy witch's costume. But the next second, it's like she's not here. There is not going to be a Halloween this year, blah, 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 right? So I went to that, and then, oh, that pain, just sock you over and over again. And in my mind, I thought, why did this have to happen? And I heard a voice in my head that said, they're right where they're supposed to be. The only explanation for that, there is no explanation for that. That's not a voice that I would have manufactured. That's not a thought that I could have come up with in that moment. And so then my next thought in my head was, why did it have to happen this way? Like, I'm the mom, I'm driving the car. I'm like, this accident is all my fault. The reason they're gone, the reason my family is in so much pain is my fault. So in my mind, I'm like, but why did it have to happen this way? And I heard back, how would you have liked it to happen? And in that question is this idea, which, previously I'd received some spiritual promptings that said that the kids were fine, they were okay, they were, where they were supposed to be, right? But in that question was, this is, they didn't go before their time. And that, and I didn't tell you this. 5 years before the accident, they fell out our second story window onto the pool deck together in this freak accident where they had opened the window and they were leaning on the screen. We just moved into this house and they were leaning on the screen talking to the dog in the backyard, and the screen gave way and they fell out onto the pool deck. And they were barely injured, but they fell out together.
They fell out together.
Yeah. And when the accident happened and I realized they had been thrown from the car, I knew in that instant they were either both alive or they were both gone. I knew that they wouldn't have stayed. They wouldn't have one wouldn't have left the other. They were either gone together or they were here together. And obviously they didn't survive, but I was able to, and I have a really good friend who comes from a Hindu background, who joined Christianity when she moved to the States as a 19-year-old. She was dealing with like this unrelenting physical issue that was plaguing her every single day. She went into a Christian prayer circle and received a healing in this prayer, like overnight. And so she also became very, very entangled in that church until it became too much. And then she had to get out because of religious harm, religious trauma. So her attachment to that church was because of the prayer of faith that created healing. And so in my mind, I'd had this prayer of faith that helped me heal. I don't know how that works. I have no explanation for that, but I lived it, and it happened. And anybody that knows me, I can see it in my journals. I have a journal from 2010 where I had been writing some things because my therapist asked me to write some things, and it's so dark and it's so ugh. And then a month later, I'm like, ah, la, 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 la. I mean, seriously, like, you can't make this up.
Hmm.
I was a different person.
Yeah.
Light came back to my life again.
Hmm.
And I always say, I often say, like, I was asleep before the accident, I died in the accident, and then I woke up. But it was a spiritual awakening that began to slowly occur. And my connection to God changed,
Hmm.
changed in a dramatic way. And eventually it could no longer fit within the box of Mormonism.
Hmm.
I know it's a crazy story.
It's like I'm just in complete awe. of you. And I mean, all of the thoughts and the feelings that I already have, which I've shared some of them, I'm hearing some echo, some echoing in my head of, it's almost like talking to myself a little bit while you're saying some of these things. Um, and for someone like myself that has a fear of death, a great fear of death, for some reason, even being when I was a member of the church, there's always this fear of, I get these little feelings of, oh, I don't want her to go here. I just have this bad feeling. And I'd always go on,
Yeah.
somebody's going to die. Somebody's going to die. Always like going around like that. And I wonder why that would be, where the church encourages you to have, so much faith and happiness and be engaged and in the church. And for a lot of people that are listening to this that aren't Mormon and aren't familiar, I just want to say too that, all of these jobs that you're doing, when you say you were, doing this for the church, that for the church, being a leader, promoting things, all this type of thing, that you're not talking about a paid position
No.
within the church. You're not even talking about really a voluntary thing where it's PTA and she's signing up. You're talking about a calling, and you're not going to turn it down.
Yep. So they call you in and they say, hey, we'd like for you to be the young women's president, which means you're responsible for all the 12 to 18-year-old teenage girls in your congregation. And you're responsible for the whole program. You're responsible for their midweek activities. You're responsible for their lessons on Sundays. And beyond that, like there's this like unspoken thing about you're responsible for keeping them engaged in the church. You're responsible for their salvation.
Right.
Like this is the unhealthy patterns that get developed within the church is this codependency of like that we're responsible for other people's choices. And think about like I was married to this first husband that started making all these horrific choices. And so in my mind, I kept thinking, oh, if I would say this better or do this better, like there's so much talk about and stories about people that show up and they say just the right thing and it changes someone's life. Well, why wasn't my brother's life changed? Why did he die the way that he did? Why was my first husband, why did he go off the deep end and do the crazy things that he did? Again, he did have a head injury and everything points to that thing that made him very
Yeah.
reactive. But the all these things happen and then we blame ourselves.
Yeah.
We blame ourselves when and so this is kind of the next piece is in 2012, so 5 years after the accident, 2 years after kind of coming back into myself and like re-engaging in life again. And I wrote a whole book about this called Miracles in the Darkness that came out 5 years ago.
I need this book. I need this book.
Well, I was all in on the church when I wrote this book, and I actually had an LDS publisher and the whole kit and
Well,
caboodle.
it wasn't
So
Chad, it wasn't Chad Daybell, was it?
no,
Okay, good. Just
no,
checking.
no, 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 no. But but if I wrote it today, I'd write it very
Oh
differently.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But it still has valuable things in it. But it was and it does tell my story, And so but
It's
two
not
years
too late. You can write another one.
I know I'm working on another one actually
Good. Good.
about this whole journey that we're talking
Good.
about today. But yeah, I don't know how much time you have, but a couple years after that healing experience, I I met this man at a luncheon, and And my mother was there. She said, tell them your story. And I was like, I didn't want to have to tell that story, you know. And I told them what happened. And this man stopped me on the way out of the restaurant. He took me by the arm and he said, you're supposed to do something with this. And it was like a lightning bolt hit me. I just can't even, if God had stood in front of me himself, I wouldn't have been any stronger. It was just like, I'm supposed to do something with this. And so I started to just kind of open my mind to this idea that you know, maybe I need to start sharing my story and helping people in some way, but I didn't know what that looked like. I actually enrolled in college. I was going to go back to become a therapist. And in the first week of school, I was like, no, I'm not in the right place. I just knew it. I just knew it just didn't feel right, didn't feel
Yeah.
good. And eventually I found coaching, which is why I do, but I have a specialty in grief. And so I developed a whole program around grief and have been able to share my story and share hope with people, you know, and share hope that, yeah, we can go through really, really hard things. And yes, it takes time, but time's not the only element. And there are pieces and ways that we grow that help us um, to start to move through the pain. You know, like if I always compare it to a physical injury, because we have a physical injury and we have to slow down and we
Hmm.
have to take care of ourselves and we have to allow the time, but we also go to the experts that say this is what you need to do to heal and that kind of thing. And so, you know, I always look at that physical element and let's use that same wisdom when it comes to our emotional injuries, because grief is an emotional injury. And I got so tired of people in the church kind of, and there's a word for it. It's called spiritual bypassing, where it's like, oh, everything is going to be okay. No, we go through the pain. The pain is real. It's real. There was a young man in our congregation whose mother was dying of cancer, and he got up in testimony meeting and said, I know I'm going to be okay because of the gospel. And I wanted to stand up and say, you are not going to be okay when your mom dies. It's going to be painful. It's going to be hard. It's going to be terrible. And then you can heal and you can adjust and you can start to move forward with your life. But there's no, you can't just go, oh, because of God, everything's okay. No, it doesn't work that way. And so, yeah, I became kind of a little bit of a, when people would make comments like that in meetings and things, I'd be like, not how it works. Gonna tell you right now, that's not how it works. And going back to church after the kids died was one of the most painful things I did, because you just feel so judged in that space. Like if I if I put a smile on my face, are they going to think
Yeah.
I don't love my kids? If I fall apart, are they going to think I'm falling apart? Well, yeah, I
Yeah.
am falling apart, by the way. So yeah, it was just really hard. But I did end up studying coaching, studying grief, doing this program. But what I started to notice, Lori, was as I was working with clients from a variety of backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
there was a certain element within the LDS population of women. I started to notice how how much they had outward authority. They were looking to their leaders or someone else to tell them what they could and couldn't do. And you know, for instance, I had one woman who was like physically ill because she was dealing with so much grief. And in her ward, they were asking her to do a certain assignment that was causing her more pain. And I said, you just need to go tell them you can't do this. Take care of yourself. I didn't say it like that. You know, I said it gently, like it was a process, right? Of helping her understand that she could take care of herself and she
Mm-hmm.
could advocate for herself and go to them and
Right.
say, you know, I've got to let this go. Well, she goes to let them know that she can't do it and she gets talked into staying. because it's a man saying, well, can't you just keep going? It's just like when I was serving as the young women's president, instead of saying, I am requesting to be released this Sunday, please release me this Sunday. I will no longer be doing this assignment. I just kept calling and begging to be released.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because yesterday I had just done a video, Julie, and I said one of the things that I hated that kind of fed into my anxiety and my being an introvert was callings and
Mm,
being asked and knowing you couldn't say no, that you had to say yes to it. And yes, you, in my mind now, later on, you wouldn't say, is it okay? I'm not comfortable with this calling because I'll tell you right now, I believe 100% of the time the bishop is going to say, well, let's talk about it.
right.
And how about we pray about it? And how about you try for a little longer and try to extend it and give you hope? Whereas now I would probably send an email since there's email. I wouldn't do it in person or on the phone. I wouldn't even have, you know, that's not my style. I'd send an email and I'd say, I'm just letting you know that I'm officially resigning from this position, just to let you know so you can find someone else to do it.
Yeah.
Thanks
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we do as adults in the world.
That's what we do.
In our jobs, in our, you know, we obviously in our jobs we have bosses that might say, okay, you've got to do this assignment.
Yeah.
But we can negotiate it, right? And we can say, you know what? I don't want this job anymore. I'm going to go work over here. Like we have that autonomy even to go, I'm going to join this group, and then this group doesn't fit anymore. Now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to join this group. But in the church, you can't even do that. You can't even say, this congregation isn't working for me. This group of people isn't working for me. I'm going to go over to the group across town because I fit better in that group. No, you can't, because your location says you have to be in this congregation. So it's just a lot of control. And so I started seeing this with my clients, and then my husband left about 5 years ago, probably 6 years ago, 6 years ago. Two of my children had left the church,
No, I
and
was going to say the church, right? You're
yeah,
talking. Okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, not me. Sorry.
Okay, good. I was
We
like,
just
oh no.
no, we just yeah. Thanks for clarifying.
Like she can't take anymore.
Yeah, we just celebrated our 32nd anniversary yesterday. So yeah,
Oh,
he's still
congratulations.
around. We're still having a great time.
Oh, that's
Um,
amazing. That's amazing.
and better than ever, because now it's like this church thing isn't in between us all the time,
And that's
and it was
something
just
else.
all in between us all the time. It was just, but he'd left a few years ago. Two of our children had left the church, a few years ago, and then in 2022 one of our kids left who had been all in, like our
Mhm,
daughter who had just served as the young women's president. Like they were the leaders, they were the stalwarts, they were, she and her
mhm,
husband were like the golden, golden couple in the church, like doing all the things and abiding by all the standards and so on and so forth. And when they left, it was such a shock to my system. And I went into a spiral. And this was crazy to me because my thoughts about eternity and whether or not we're going to be okay had changed so much because of my relationship with God and my understanding of things, because of losing so many people in my life. Like I wasn't worried about him. But then when this happened and I went into this spiral, I thought, this is not healthy.
mhm,
What is going on here?
mhm.
and it caused me to look at things a little differently. I was already nuanced.
Yeah.
I was already teaching Relief Society and talking about spiritual bypassing in Relief Society. And everyone would come up afterwards, thank you so much for that lesson. I really needed that. And I'm like, I'm not even teaching what's on this paper. I'm teaching, I would teach from the New Testament. I would teach from Jesus's teachings, and
And next they said, and thanks for the Xanax too. Just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah.
yeah. So at any rate, I was just looking at it going, that something is not healthy here. And I was seeing all of these patterns. And also I started to recognize like I had never recognized before, because I'd always been a woman in the church and leadership, and I'd always felt respected. And
Mhm.
I'd always felt a part of the in crowd, if you will, for lack of a better word, right? And all of a sudden, my husband's not going to church with me. I'm changing wards. These people don't know me. And all the dynamic has changed dramatically. And everybody talking to me in leadership only wants to talk about how to reactivate my family.
Yeah.
And
Oh
I'm
boy.
like, oh, I'm here, right here. I'm sitting in front of you, and they're not seeing me. They're just seeing me as a means to get to the people. And these are good people. I'm like, I understand where they're coming from. It's part of the soup. It's part of the narrative. Like it's what we were, it was what I was conditioned to do, was to take responsibility for everybody and everybody's salvation. And so as a leader, like you were just responsible. If somebody fell off, became inactive on your watch, you felt responsible for it. And so I just I started to recognize how vulnerable I was as a woman in the church who did not have a man representing her and did not have that. I started to recognize that the respect I was given was because I was a married woman in the church, that it was a privileged position that I was in as someone who was responsible with a husband who was responsible, who were, showing up and serving. And I no longer, and so it just gave me a different view of things. And I started going, this is not healthy. I
No.
just started seeing all the unhealthiness of it, and I couldn't unsee it anymore. And I couldn't justify a lot of the teachings because I I didn't believe all this anymore, that we had to jump through 100 hoops to get back to God. In my view, the parable of the prodigal son is about all of us coming home. We die, we're wrapped in God's arms. It doesn't matter what we did. I know that's radical and that's weird, and people will say,
No,
"Oh, that's just
I
yeah,
don't think it is. I mean, to me personally, but that makes sense. That it makes more sense to me. And I think that I don't know, listening to you, wouldn't you say that not just women, but maybe especially women,
yeah,
there's kind of a trauma bond relationship with the church, and um and it's hard for me to explain it, but it's like you can go years and years and years, and you'll be in the middle of a store somewhere, and there's this little tiny bit of guilt because you'll think, oh, I'm not a Mormon anymore. I'm not, wow, I just had a glass of wine, or oh, I just did this. There's always that little something, kind of like reminding you that you're doing wrong.
yeah.
You're not following rules. Always wanting to go back and stick to that. And that's why people have a hard time, I think, disconnecting and moving forward. And
Yeah. Well, it's really challenging. And so I was in this liminal space for a couple years going, okay, this isn't healthy. I don't know how to navigate all this. I'd been able to navigate it before then, but it got to the point where I was like struggling to navigate it. then women's voices became louder, and there was that whole uproar on the social media account last year where the women were going, what do you mean we have authority? Like, we have no authority. And there was a lot of stuff going on. But I have to tell you a funny story. So several years ago, I homeschooled my kids too. So
Oh, wow.
several years ago, yeah, I, I, I've lived 100 lives.
Yes,
Um,
you have. Yes, you have. I'm going to drink to that. A little bit of peach tea here.
but I was in the church for 6 decades, so
I,
I'm not a spring chicken. So,
I want to say that's a long sentence, but that's rude. I won't say that.
but I was homeschooling my children, and I'd gone to a women's conference at the church, and of course,
Hmm.
men were speaking at the women's conference. And the stake president gets up and he's talking to the women, and he's saying, you need to get out of the malls. You need to stop shopping. You need to look at where you can do more, blah, 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 blah. So I'm on my way home. I spend a couple days thinking about this, and I'm going, okay, I was at the time, I was like teaching piano lessons, homeschooling my kids, leader of my homeschool group, busy in a calling, all the things. And all the things. And then
Oh
then
my
my
gosh. I
I
can't.
said to my husband, with 6 kids at home, right? And I said to my husband one day, I said, okay, so the state president said we need to get out of the malls, we need to stop shopping, we need to we need to let go of the frivolous things and really choose those things that matter most. And I said, and I've decided that the thing that I can give up is laundry. And he started laughing. He says, you already have.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, you already have. You already gave up the laundry. But I was like, here I am, this faithful member who's doing everything I possibly can. And then we get to a meeting and a man tells us we need to be doing more. But see, the problem with this whole thing is oh, I wish we had time to go into this, but like men, they're ego driven, like, and I don't mean that negatively. I'm just like, society has conditioned them to be ego driven. Like, what career are you going to do, what are you going to do, like, how are you going to shine in the world, right?
Make people
And
proud. Yeah.
right, and women are conditioned to serve, 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 have a family, take care of your kids, serve, serve, serve. So you've got all these men who are over here in this kind of ego thing, knowing they need to balance a little more with service.
Hmm.
And women need to balance a little more with some ego, you know, balance a little more with some self-care,
And self-respect.
self-respect. And so when you have the men giving the messages to the women and they're saying you need to serve, 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 they're just driving women into the ground with these messages.
Yeah, because it's never enough.
It's never enough.
And that's a feeling of when you're at a women's conference, ideally it would be a women speakers
Right.
that could relate to other women. I'm not to say that everyone in the audience would relate or grasp it or be interested, but to have a man who has a different mindset and a different responsibility in terms of the church's in the church's eyes, and he's taking his spiritual beliefs too and just wrapping that all up with a ribbon, and inside is just nothing but more work.
Yeah. And
Inside is a vacuum cleaner. It wasn't the beautiful, piece of jewelry you thought it might be. It's a new mop or a new appliance. So you can work.
it's like they say, if they're telling you that you have authority, it's because you don't. You know, if they're telling you you have power, it's because you don't. If they're having to keep saying that, it's because you don't. They don't tell that to the men because they do have the power and the authority. But once I saw the harm, then it gave me permission to engage with the things that the church has taught about history and what's true and so on and so forth. And then once I started looking at that, it all fell apart. And at that point I was like, I'm done. I can't with integrity stay in this system.
Wow. Your story is just, I can tell there's a lot more. We may need to do a part two. And I mean, but it's just miraculous to me, that you're still here smiling, giving back, coaching, writing more, a wife, a mother, you know,
A grandma of 11 now.
what?
Yeah, is that
How
crazy?
See, and that's the thing that confuses me is I'm thinking about all this, thinking you're only 30, so how could this be that all this
No.
happened? So I really, yeah, I'll have to do the math. I'm still
Yeah, like I
confused.
said, I was in the church for 6 decades. So
Yeah, I have to think about this really hard now, do the math based on how you look. But um, yeah, I just am amazed. I mean, at your ability to survive and um, and get out of that super dark place.
yeah, definitely.
And
Definitely.
there's so many people that this is going to resonate with. I know personally there's parts of your story that, like, I'm just shaking my head, you know. But
Right.
and I know a lot of people will, and a lot of people that you know, I hope some people that are Mormon, that are on the fence, that have some similar feelings will feel some type of, I don't want to say the word comfort, but I
Yeah.
hope that it will be eye opening at least.
Yeah, well, it's one of the reasons that I do these types of interviews. It's one of the reasons I talk about my story is I because some people become uncomfortable. They see the harm. They can't stay in it because of the harm and the trauma, religious trauma that's inflicted for various reasons. And I've studied religious trauma, and then they leave, but they don't totally deconstruct. And so they hold on, like you said, they're drinking a glass of wine and going, oh no, I'm doing something wrong, right? So they hold on to the old conditioning while being out because it's healthier, but they're still hanging on to all that. And I think my background in grief too just makes me want to be in this space and say, it's okay to be angry. It's part of grief. It's okay to feel depressed at times because it's part of the grief. This is a grief experience. I have talked to so many people who have gone through a lot of different things in their life, and they've said the hardest thing they ever did was walk away from the church.
Because it's a death.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
death of what they lived their
Yeah.
whole life, especially people that grew up in the church. It's kind of a death, like a divorce is a death, you
Well,
know.
and when you make that announcement, hey, I'm not a part of this anymore, that your respect goes from here to there. Like instantly that you are no longer you are the devil itself himself,
Well,
which I
Julie,
don't believe in the devil, but
Julie, I'll have to tell you a quick story. Just, and I haven't said this to the viewers yet or to our audience. I remember after my mother died, and you know, exiting because it had already been in my mind stewing pretty much my whole life for all these different reasons. But it's sad to me because I feel guilty that, well, my mom's died, so now I can leave and I won't hurt her feelings.
yeah.
And I remembered that the church couldn't figure out where I was. At this point, I'd moved into my mom's house and I was over there. The front door wasn't locked because in Rigby, Idaho, you don't lock the front door. And I remember I was up in the bedroom. I had the door locked. I was sitting at the computer, one of those big, heavy computers, the newer ones. And I was on the computer and I was smoking a cigarette because I thought, I'm going to try this, you know? and I'm not a smoker, but at that time it was just like I said to people, let me try a little bit. And people have come on this channel and people that are currently Mormon and just said, what are you doing with your life? But anyway, I was up in the room and I was smoking and the fumes were everywhere. And I'm sure they were floating under the door. I mean, I was enveloping myself in this cigarette while I sat there.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I hear the front door open and shut. And I'm like, huh? Up the stairs. I hear these footsteps. And then I hear a knocking at the door, Julie. And it's this woman from church. And she's knocking on the door saying, Lori, open this door right now. And do I smell cigarettes? I'm like 30, 31 years old.
Oh, wow.
She'd walked right into the house, right up and tried to confront me or intervene, or someone had told her that she was going to be influential somehow. And I was working through the pain. I was working my way through it no matter how I had to do it. I wasn't avoiding it. I was walking right through it. And here she was. And there I was, lounged back like a movie star, smoking a cigarette. Because that's what I had to do at that moment.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I don't do that. That's it, it turns out that that's not who I don't do that. But the point is at that moment, I was angry and I felt a little bit rebellious, like, let me take
Well,
that word of wisdom and just go down it and smash everyone out.
and don't you think it's a little bit of a key to your freedom? It's like, okay, I am letting go of these arbitrary rules that have been handed to me, that I've been living by, that now I realize were arbitrary. And while, like you said, like smoking is not healthy, right? So, just in general, right? So, yeah,
Common sense, I know that.
right,
Yes,
right,
right?
exactly. But there was no crime, there was no moral issue with you smoking a cigarette or, someone having a drink or coffee for heaven's sakes or tea.
Or
It's,
Coca-Cola.
yeah, yeah, all those things. Anyway,
Yeah, and anyway, I just wanted to tell that little story because I've never told it, but I
that's
didn't. I
crazy.
didn't answer her at the door. By the way, I was silent, and had she had picked that lock and walked into that room, I don't know what I would have said other than, "Do you want one?"
Wow. That's
And get
crazy.
out of my house because you're trespassing. I
That's
was like in the mood, where I wasn't tolerating, but just had to tell that little story because, if you're out there and that's how you feel and stuff, it doesn't mean you're going to heck.
no, not at all.
And but Julie, I mean, what a first guest to have on my little itty bitty new YouTube channel. That I will say, this means so much to me to hear your story and your resilience and you glow and you have this
Uh,
happen. You just and I'm like, how though? How? And if anyone else is wondering how and wants to talk to you, certainly your website, your links to social media will all be here
yeah.
in the description so that people can reach out to you because, wow,
Yeah.
you could help a lot of people. And I know that this interview and opening up and sharing and, and also again on, my behalf, just my deepest condolences
Thank you.
to you for the loss of your sweet children and your brother and and you're strong, man. You are superwoman. You are superwoman.
Oh, we all are. We all are just beautiful beings. We're all just, we're just all beautiful beings and we don't need to carry shame and we don't need somebody else to tell us that we're worthy. We are all worthy.
I,
So
I
just
think
I want
so.
to share that love and that perspective. Yeah.
I thank you, Julie. You've shown a lot of respect while explaining your journey, and I can appreciate that. You're much more eloquent and elegant than me. Um,
I
and
wouldn't say
so
that. I
you
have
are
enjoyed
totally,
I've enjoyed watching your videos, and when you said you would like to have guests, I was like, "Oh, that would be fun."
yeah, well, I'm glad that you said it. When I got the email, I was like, what? Because no one else has said it. But of all the people, and I love everyone out there, but of all the people, I just feel like I was handed this beautiful gift of you and this interview. I feel like, oh my gosh, this YouTube channel is meant to be, the fact that I even have this conversation with you, so thank you so much. And I hope we have a part two one day, because I'm sure there'll be other things. People come into the comments and type until your fingers are sore, and ask Julie all the questions, or go find Julie, or share this video with other people that you think it could help. And yeah, sending lots of love your way,
Thank
Julie, and big hugs.
you. Oh,
And I
yeah.
always end my video with kisses, and it's mostly to you this time than everybody else. But yeah, I just adore you, and yeah, we're new
Well,
friends.
it's been a beautiful pleasure. Thank you so much, Lori.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.